said you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Hi, I'm Gail Rubenstein, the founder and CEO of a company called Retail Resilient, social selling for the car industry. And we help auto dealers, auto agencies, and vendors in the auto industry sell more cars, service more cars, and make more money using our social selling strategy. That includes TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and anything else you can think of. So if you're looking to invest thousands and make millions, we're definitely the social selling company for you. Like I said, who said you can't teach an old dog new tricks?
If you run a service drive, you know these days first impressions matter. But when your advisors are tied up with inbound phone calls, they tend to neglect their other, more important duties. And did you know 75% of all service calls are frequently asked questions and routine requests? Still, the average dealer misses up to 30% of inbound calls, adding up to a ton of missed service opportunity and increased customer churn. 68% of callers actually go elsewhere if they can't get through, which means you could be losing $60,000 to $70,000 every month in service revenue simply from missing calls. So who will pick up? Introducing Brooke.
Hi there.
Your best service scheduling assistant. Brooke is the first intelligent digital voice assistant to answer, handle, and appoint all of your inbound service calls. Hiring Brooke means absolutely no call goes unanswered, boosting your customer satisfaction and reducing your overhead costs. And talking to Brooke is like talking to a friend with human-level understanding and a friendly conversational voice. Her conversational intelligence is built on millions of actual service industry conversations, making her the easiest onboard you'll ever have. She can handle any volume of calls and follows your policies every step of the way, 24/7. That means even when the lights are off, Brooke is always on.
And I can do it without missing a beat.
You really do check all the boxes. Book with Brooke today. Visit Brooke.ai or call 866-942-1236. Finally, the perfect match.
See that light above the bathroom door over there? That's a big time saver for our technicians and other recon staff. The light goes on when the bathroom is occupied. Now techs keep working until the light goes out. Then they know for sure the room is empty. And when they're busy there, they're also catching up on the news. Not that news, but news they need for the job. I post these where they can't be missed. Too often, the search for the right product brings valuable time. This inexpensive detailer's cart organizes supplies. Now techs lay their hands on what they need without delay. We got these time savers from Rapid Recon, the reconditioning software company that's always defining better reconditioning solutions for dealerships like yours. When the goal is to get cars through recon in 72 hours or less, every step, every minute, every better decision made helps towards that goal. For more recon efficiency ideas like these, talk to the recon experts at rapidrecon.com.
Special thanks to all our sponsors. We wouldn't be able to do the show without them. And of course, feel free to check them out on our website and of course on our email that we send out quite often. And welcome and good morning. Couple books. It was a little hard to find books that made sense. I don't know why this is taking so long to load. Anyway, Gross Deception, A Tale of Shifting Markets, Shrinking Margins, and the New Truth of Used Car Profitability. Finance Reimagined by Michael Bennett and Lloyd Tressel. I don't know why the image is not showing up. Anyway, go ahead, Jeff, with our disclaimer. Oh, there you go. It's the Art of F&I.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, whenever you're watching the podcast, etc. And for those of you tuning in, welcome and good morning. It was a lovely holiday weekend from Canada. I'm not sure in the States, although there's 50 of you people down there, so who knows what state to state what it is. But looks like everybody's working down there, but it is the beginning of the month, so thanks for tuning in. As always, the opinions generated here today are those of our guests and not necessarily that of Ian and Jeff or the AutoHub show, even though maybe we do. So if you want to see the details, please check out our page on our website, autohubshow.com. Ian.
We're going to start today, obviously, talking about how to calculate accurate payments. If you weren't here earlier, as we played a quick video about how to do this either shorthand or with a calculator, be it a physical calculator or one online, you can do it that way, but most people probably won't do it that way. So let's get into it. Jeff?
Yes, well, again, good morning. And joining us as our featured guest today, which is Rusty West, who's the president at MarketScan Information Systems from a sprawling metropolis of Camarillo, California. And Rusty, say hi to everybody and tell us a bit about yourself and your company and your connection to online payments.
Yeah, well, hey, thanks for having me. It's always fun doing these podcasts. I'm Rusty West. I'm co-founder of MarketScan, and we're a automotive payments as a service company. We've been around since 1988, and we calculate 250-ish million payments for cars every day. So,
perfect. Well, thank you. I was waiting for you to go longer. I was going, oh. That's okay.
I've been doing this 34 years. I can talk as long as you want. So,
so you've been doing online
for everybody.
You've been doing online payments for 34 years?
No, so we started out as a leasing desking tool in the late 80s, right? My dad was kind of one of the pioneers for leasing. When I graduated college, I wrote a software package for his leasing company and had a big independent leasing company in Atlanta, Georgia. He was doing 500-600 units a month. And so I wrote a software package for him that would allow him to analyze every different lending institution. He was signed up with dozens of lenders to figure out which one offers the cheapest monthly payment, right? What's the best deal? And obviously, it's a bunch of data that was the big part of it. And when we realized we had something we could sell, started selling to some stores in Atlanta. A marketing company from California picked it up, and then we launched it. And we were one of those, we were killing it. And the first Gulf War started, and then wash, rinse, repeat, right? But at one time, I think our customers were responsible for 85, 86% of all leases written in the country. Wow. And September 11th happened, leasing stopped. And we got into the subprime finance, all the rest of the stuff. And but we learned we were a data company. And about 7-8 years ago, we started powering a bunch of our competitors, and digital retailing kind of took off. And we kind of did this, and then COVID hit, and it was a hockey stick. We went from powering about 3,000 dealerships in the country to 9,000 in less than a year, and we're over 10,000 dealerships right now. So,
wow. Well done.
Perfect. Well, I have to say too, it's also fun to have a real car guy on. As I look in the background there, I see your Le Mans Rothman's. I'm not sure what it is. I see the crankshaft, and I see a NASCAR and the helmets, and of course the number one dad picture I see up in your bookcase. So thank you very much. I would be very remiss not to recognize our friend Larry Feldman joining us from a teeny tiny town outside of Philadelphia. And even though Larry isn't our featured guest, he's always featured in our hearts. So thanks for joining us, Larry. We'll get right into it. Ian, please, let's get the ball rolling.
Well, obviously, I guess you summarized it, talking a little bit about the move towards digital retail from not only the OEM side, but from the dealer side. And I'm assuming as we've moved to more and more online research from customers, whether it be on an OEM site or on a dealership website, payments are part of that. What's the best way to generate payments online, in your opinion? Obviously, your company does that, but what's the best way for a consumer to get that information and in an accurate way?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer. It's very hard for even digital retailing companies to get it right. Because there's so many variables that have to be taken into consideration, and most of that information is not available to the consumer, right? So when we look at calculating transaction, we call it the scientifically perfect solution, which is kind of like the very best penny perfect payment, right? Because there's thousands of lending institutions out there that consumers have access to, that dealers have access to as well. In order for us to get it right, there's 5 classes of data that have to be taken into consideration. And consumers one of them, right? Everybody's got their own budget, credit profile, appetite for a particular vehicle, driving habits, and all that kind of stuff. The other four classes are the manufacturer, the lender, the municipality, and the dealer. And the manufacturers, have all the stuff on their vehicles, and then also all the rebates and incentives and all the goofy rebates. National Funeral Directors Association, for a while, you get $500 on a Chrysler product if you were an undertaker. So we got to get those right. And then there's all the different lending institutional programs. So everybody's got their own rates, their maximum advance, their fees. You get into leasing, it gets way more complex. So we got to get all that stuff right. And then there's all the crazy taxes for the municipalities, and registration fees and COX and all that stuff. The hardest part, I think, for a consumer to get right is the dealership class of data, because every dealership dictates the terms and conditions under which they're willing to transact. And they have their own portfolio of lenders, their selling price rules for their cars, what fees they charge, how they interpret tax laws, and all that kind of stuff. So it's challenging for a consumer, right? I think there's a huge push to fix that, because what we're seeing historically is we got payments that are calculated, consumer bounces all around in their journey, and no two journeys are exactly the same. I just had a pop up that said the audio was low. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Just have a little bit of trouble in the recording, just in some of the lower tones there.
We'll fix it
Yeah.
for the after
Okay.
if it needs to.
All right.
I'll put it up.
I'll speak up a little bit. So, but every consumer kind of bounces around in their journey, right? And what happens is if we're getting quoted $400 a month here, and then we get quoted $375 here, and then we get to the store and it's $450, right? The only payment the consumer remembers is the lowest one, is the $375. And that's that disconnect. And that disconnect happens if we're not taking everything into consideration, right? And, I wouldn't want to be a consumer trying to buy a car in this day and age, because I think it's supply is super low, prices are crazy, and there's a rush to try and get information out to the consumer, but it's taking some companies longer than others. So the journey can be confusing.
So how accurate can it be?
It can be perfectly accurate if it's done right. Where the biggest disconnect is the dealer's terms and conditions. And if we don't accurately represent the dealer's payments their way, then we're mismanaging the consumer's expectations along their journey, right? The days right now of saying, okay, well, this vehicle's a window sticker and a buy rate and whatever, you're setting the consumer up for a loss of trust, because when they transition from one site or one technology or one whatever to another, when they get closer to the dealership, when they get further down the sales funnel, all of a sudden all these additional things come into play that maybe weren't taken into consideration upstream. And when that happens, the payment changes and then the process falls apart, trust is lost, and they give you, I gave them 1 star because 0 wasn't available kind of thing.
Well, the good thing about that, I have to say, for somebody that ordered their car at the beginning of the year that's finally arrived, with the interest rates changing, they're expecting it.
Yeah. But
Interesting. Jeff.
Yeah.
Why do you think we have a problem with quoting the payments and accurate payments?
I think up until, so I'm gonna back up a little bit. Pre-COVID, there was not a huge push, or it was a little bit of an ignored push from the dealer community to quote payments online, right? I want to get them in the store. I don't want to tell them what my payments are online. There's a huge resistance to quoting any kind of a monthly payment online, because I don't want my competitors to know what my payments are, that kind of stuff. So there was not a ton of investment, if you will, put into it from technology companies to get it right. There's a lot of payment estimators out there, but they, disclaimers with fonts this big saying, hey, this is just an estimate. Your payment probably going to be different when you get to the store. Not going to be right. COVID hit, and all of a sudden the need to do it right accelerated exponentially. Right? Everybody's stuck. Consumers can't come into dealerships. There was a glut of inventory. Right? They didn't know what to do with them. Right? And a consumer, all of us have learned how to live online. Right? If I have 2 days in a week where an Amazon package doesn't show up at my house or my office, and my wife's an absolute professional at Amazon. She should get a medal for this one, right? But it makes it easy, right? We know exactly what we're buying. We know exactly how much it's going to cost. We click buy it now. They ding our credit card for that exact amount, and there's no surprises, right? And the consumers are expecting that. And then when we're in an age where we can't go into the dealership, we can't leave the house, right? We got all these shelter-in-place orders and all this stuff. Then everybody's coming out of the woodwork, and they're more well-funded technology companies trying to address this problem than there have ever been in the history of car business, right? So there's a big push. Some of the technology companies are really getting it right. Some of them are working to get it right, and some of them are still missing the mark. But I think it's all driven by the consumer, and until the dealers were ready to hear it, or the dealer community was ready to hear it, there wasn't much of a change.
Well, you mentioned driven by the consumer because it's very interesting, as we discussed before we went live, just about the, I'm not sure, depending where you are, the added dealer markup pricing on vehicles. And it is being driven by the consumers in certain cases, because during COVID, you had to go in there and you had to get accurate payments. You had to be perfect. And somebody ran in and, depending on the TV show you watch, depends on how silly it looks, like all the precautions we took. But now it's being driven by the consumer, because the consumer says, I want that car. I want it now. And in many cases, I don't care. And, really at this moment with the current situation, are accurate payment quotes worthwhile? Does it really matter?
Oh, it still matters. 100% it still matters, right? Laws of supply and demand are going to dictate price, right? That's how the world works, right? And I think if 20 years from now, we'll look back, this may be the very best educational example of the dynamics of the laws of supply and demand that we've ever seen. Vehicles were blown out at the beginning of COVID. There was a glut of inventory. People couldn't leave the house. Dealers were panicking. What do we do? We get rid of these cars. Fast forward, you got chip shortages. You've got, Russia-Ukraine war. So we can't get neon and palladium out of Russia, and we can't wiring harnesses out of Ukraine, right? So we got all this stuff that's screwing up the supply chain. And when the supply chain gets screwed up, there's no vehicles. People pay premium for it, and that's just how it works. So if you're going to pay a premium, that's okay, right? What we do know is that when consumers are paying a premium, the prices are going up. Consumers aren't stroking a check for a vehicle, right? They have to have a payment. So if we're not managing them properly upstream, when they do go to take delivery of this car, then all of a sudden they have a huge surprise. They may still buy the car. They may still step up because they can't live without it. They want the new cool widget, whatever. But you're not going to get the good CSI reports. You're going to have unhappy customers because they were, whoa, what do you mean my payment's this much? That's not what it said online, right? So we need to accurately represent what they want to do every step of the way. And if we do that, there's no surprises. But consumers, listen, when there's a shortage of inventory, if you're going to charge a whole bunch over window stickers, somebody's going to pay it, right? They're going to pay it. And if they can find it online early and they know what it's going to cost them, and they can do the whole transaction over the phone and not get surprised, they're going to be happy, even though they're paying a premium, because they're getting something that they may not be able to get anywhere else.
Yeah, for sure. Ian.
Yeah, we were just doing some training. Jeff and I were talking about it a little earlier. And believe it or not, the dealership before we did training wasn't quoting any payments even in the store until they got to the F&I office, which we thought was a little bit interesting. But obviously, if you're not quoting payments online, there's a downside, being that customers are conditioned to the Amazon experience, or they're conditioned to the Apple experience, or Netflix, or whatever you want to call it. What's the downside for dealers to say, listen, just bring them in, even if they can't come in? I'm not giving them that payment because my competitor's going to know about it, and I don't want to lose my profitability by handing out payments to anybody without any kind of commitment.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think 5 years ago it was a very valid argument, but the downside now is that your competitors are doing it, right? And it's not a matter of, okay, well, I don't want to quote one because I don't want them to know what my payments are. If my competitors are quoting payments online and the consumer's got absolutely no idea what his payment's actually going to be, then he's going to go path of least resistance. He's going to go where he can get the information. and say, okay, these guys are transparent and I know what to expect, right? We know that rates aren't what rates seem to be, right? You get 0% financing for 72 months on certain products. Those programs are never offered to consumers because those programs rates can't be marked up, right? So you get a guy with an 800 credit score is getting hit at 6.9, 7.9, 8.9% at the store because there's 2, 3, 4, 5 points markup on that transaction to make the reserve. And that impacts the monthly payment in a huge way. If we don't manage the consumer's expectations up front, and they know your payments are going to be this high, then when they go to the store, what are the chances that thing sticks, right? You're not going to tell me my payments are I go to finance, and all of a sudden, okay, I played around with your online calculator on your website and said estimate payment should be somewhere around $600, and now you're telling me it's $850. How do we get that much of a leap, right? How is it that much more expensive? And then they have to explain while they're in the finance office. It's just, there's no reason to create the battle if we can manage their expectations further upstream.
So when obviously you have a unique position, being that you have roughly 1/3 of the dealer body in the U.S., quoting some form of payment online using your tool. What are you hearing from the other stores who don't want to do that? Like, what are they saying as to why they don't want to do that?
We're not, right? I know that sounds a little bit weird, but we're kind of the Intel inside, right? So we're calculating payments for a whole bunch of different technology companies, and they're presenting the payments, and they're actually managing the relationship with the dealerships also. So we don't get the whole, hey, we don't want to go payment stuff online. We don't hear that too much. We go to a bunch of different conferences, and I've been fortunate enough to be on some panels and speak at some of them. And the theme of, hey, we don't want to do that online has started to go away a lot, right? Which is, okay, these guys are kicking our butts now. How do we keep up?
Right.
I think the one thing that's been the saving grace for the dealers who have not been aggressive about going after, reinvesting in their future and all that stuff is the fact that there's very little inventory and they're all making money. Right? It's like selling BMWs in the 80s, but we know how that, worked out. There's a lot of guys in the 80s that had BMW dealerships who were very, very rich who are no longer in business, so.
That's a very interesting thing you mentioned that, because that seems to be the very big undertone right now. And a lot of people are saying, I'm making money hand over fist. I'm not going to stop doing this. And then there's others, probably the same organization, who's saying, just wait a second. There was something mentioned, I saw online, there's a Subaru dealer, I'm not sure where, who's now refusing to sell vehicles to people outside of his market because of the fact that he's got to supply his own customers. And I think they're also not doing markups. But it's funny, you reminded me of something when you mentioned COVID, because one big thing that happened during COVID is the RV dealers went nuts. They were selling them, people couldn't holiday, etc. Now I drive by them and I don't know where they get the money. Yes, the bank, but how you can get on for 45, 50, 60, $100 million financing for these acres and acres of RVs right now. And dealers should look at that, because they were getting $650,000, $700,000 for a $400,000 motorhome like 2 years ago, year and a half ago. So the question: what are the biggest mistakes that have been mistakes, misdirections, blunders? I love to ask this on every show. What are these big problems that we're doing right now with online payments, with quotes, etc.?
Ian, would you mind, Jeff, after Rusty answers this, if I jump into it, I had a couple thoughts.
Yeah, no worries.
I don't know, Larry. I really don't know. Rusty, please.
You could go before me and make my job easier, Larry. That would be good.
Rusty, it would be my pleasure, and it's a pleasure to meet you. A couple of the things that you said. First of all, you said a while back, if things are done right, and one of the classic problems in every part of our society and always in our business is people not doing things right, not paying attention, not looking at what they did, not making sure the numbers make sense. As a salesman, as an owner, man, how many zillions of times have we seen the back of the license said they moved, the front said they didn't make the copy, or the digit was wrong. So like everything else, the emphasis is on doing it right the first time, right? What's the old thing, junk in, junk out on any system. But the other thing is forgetting how cyclical life is and all businesses. You said it beautifully at the beginning. You were all the way up, you were all the way down. The Gulf War, 9/11. But the bottom line is you kept your eye on doing things right and you move your business forward. And that's why you are where you are. The biggest danger now, when they ask the question, it just triggered, is people thinking, this is great. I'll just keep asking $10,000 over list and not sell to people out of my market. If you think this is all going to last, then you're really not paying attention. And in my instance, it's fabulous because as Jeff and Ian always say, I'm too humble to mention, and I am the world's greatest motivational trainer. I know I'm going to have the field day of all field days, because even the good dealers are getting into bad habits, because you could use a trained animal to point at the car and go, there it is, there's the price, do you want it or not, sucker? So I think when this cycle turns, and it's going to turn, we're going to have to understand that we're back to the basics. Jeff, Ian, Rusty, when I train veterans rather than rookies, one of the things the managers always ask me to do is tell these guys how to break a slump, because I don't care how good you are in the car business. It's more baseball than football or basketball or hockey. I mean, maybe you hit 400 more than 300 when I got into business because they shop less dealers and they do so much research online. But you're still going to have times when you don't sell. And dealers, everybody where I go, it's the same thing. They're falling out of their patterns. They're falling out of the things that did them right. So I always go back to this, and it's extra poignant today, Rusty, because we just lost a guy who I always say is the greatest winner in the history of all sports, Bill Russell, who won 11 NBA championships going against Wilt Chamberlain, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Oscar Robertson every year, 2 in college and a gold medal. After he established himself as the greatest winner in the history of sports, you had a guy that came up after him named Lou Alcindor, who became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And he won 3 NCAA championships under the great John Wooden. And the next year they got in the equivalent of a LeBron James or a Kobe Bryant, the most recruited schoolboy in the country. His name was Bill Walton. And Walton showed up and said, Coach Wooden, please make me like Lou Alcindor / Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He said, great. Let me show you how to pull up your socks and tie your shoes so you don't get blisters. He thought Wooden was kidding. What are you talking about? I'm Bill Walton. He says, Bill, I don't care who you are. Around here, we start with the basics. So if you don't mind me reading Rusty's mind, because he's obviously a good guy and a bright guy, what he was going to tell you is the thing to do before, during, and after the chip crisis and every other problem is to get back to basics and make sure what you're doing makes sense. This will cure every slump. They'll fix every business. Rusty, I don't know you, but from listening to you speak, I could tell that you think like I think, and I don't want to scare you because I'm a little mentally damaged. You
I get along pretty well.
Yeah, perfect. The only difference between us is you're dressed better and they never have to worry about my volume other than turning it down, not turning it up. But you think just like I think. You don't care how many morons are around you. You're going to continue to do what you do as well and as accurately as you can. Correct?
Yeah, to a certain extent. So, I look at this space and so I'm a scientist, right? I mean, literally, I'm a computer geek. I'm very lucky.
Wait a minute. That's beautiful because I'm also a scientist. Jeff and Ian described me as an alchemist because I turn normal people completely insane. Just wanted to mention.
Perfect. So I've been very blessed where I've surrounded myself with brilliant people, right? Great marketing, a good sales team, that stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm a technologist. And I've got degrees in math, computer science, and physics. And if you buy into physics, which I do, for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. Right? So right now, we've had a very big action, right? We've got this huge chip shortage. We've got all this stuff that's happened over here, right? And like you said, Larry, there's always a correction. The cycle in the automotive industry is every 7 years. Every 7 years for as long as I've been around the car business. And put it in perspective, my dad was in the car business before he met my mom, right? right? So literally everybody in our family, you cut us, a little bit of border oil comes out, right? You know, so every 7 years, there's some kind of goofiness that goes on. Sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 6, but it's about a 7-year cycle. And we've got 3 categories of dealers right now. And you don't have to be a huge group. You could be a single point. You could have 15 stores. You could be one of the big publics. But there's 3 categories. There are those guys who are aggressively, and when I say aggressively, throwing tons of resources and smart people at figuring out how are we going to meet the needs of the consumer that we're going to be dealing with in the not too distant future, right? We've got dealers that are kind of taking a wait and see approach. And then we've got the dealers like you mentioned, Larry, which is this is never going to end. We're printing money. I'm sticking Charmin in the copy machine and $100 bills are popping out. This is great. Right? Those guys are going to be in a world of hurt when things change, right? Because even getting back to basics is going to be super important. But getting back to basics, when I look at getting back to basics, it's what do we do to improve our business and to grow our business? And if I'm a retailer, which car dealers are retailers, then what I need to do is I need to figure out how do I meet the needs of my consumer? How do I know how to influence their behavior and get them to do business with us and enjoy doing business with us because we earn the right to ask them for an order and we earn the right to keep them as a customer in our service drive and everything. We treated them well. We managed their expectations. We did everything right. In order to do that for the consumer of the future, we got to be online. And when I say we got to be online, we can't have missteps because what happens is when we go from point A to point B to point C, and then we get a different message in point B, we bounce as a consumer and we find a different path. And the beautiful thing is that we can do it in half a second on one of these devices, right? We don't have to sit there with the yellow pages and scratch our head like we had to 30 years ago. We can boom, 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 boom. Like, you know what? These guys are smoking crack. Let me go find something else. It's a little difficult now because inventory is low, but when inventory normalizes, which it always does, and it's going to have to, then we're going to be in one of those scenarios where it's a buyer's marketing, not a seller's market. And when it is, the dealers and the technology companies and everybody else who have done it right, who have planned for this evolution, if you will, which is where we're going to end up, those are going to be the ones who get the most engagement. And they're going to get the engagement because they got it right. And these guys over here are going to get left literally, what happened, right? How did this happen? How could I let this happen, right? You know, scratching their head.
Rusty, it's because they never understood the quote from Ben Franklin. Everybody steals it, but it was Franklin that said it. When you're finished changing, you're finished.
Yep.
You always got to be moving forward. And because you quoted Isaac Newton with for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and you indicated you have 3 degrees, I just wanted to publicly stated that I dated a girl who went to college, just so we're on like an equal footing.
Hey, well, I also came to mind, I have 1 degree, which is a UCS. Used car
UCS.
salesman.
Listen, I will tell you that getting technology degrees and never taking a business class is not conducive for entrepreneurship, right? So we call it, or I call it shoelaces, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
shoelaces,
Rusty,
you know, being kicked in the teeth so many times, I've acquired a taste for shoelaces.
oh, yeah. But it's funny you mentioned, you know, if you get cut, you're bleeding motor oil. It's very true. Yesterday, my daughter's boyfriend had their car and was driving down from camping up about 50 miles north of here, and it overheated. So we left it overnight. So yesterday we go back with them to pick it up, and they're driving and it's getting hot. And then my daughter texts me and she says, "Don't worry about it. We got the heat on. Now it's 85 degrees here, which is like to die with here." But she says, "Don't worry, I got the heat on, turned it on full blast, and now the car's not running as hot." So it's just in here.
Mhm.
After a little while, you be around cars so much that
Yeah, that's right.
it just is. It just is.
Just
But
an
you
extra
did
little
mention-
radiator under there.
Exactly. But you did mention too that this shift and consumers will sort of dictate it. And whenever we talk about that, I always wonder something though. You know, the show's about online payments and getting accurate payments. And so the customer can knows what they're going to get before they get in there, and then of course sometimes they get it the other way. But there's still success, and today, right now, there's quite a bit of success from people that just are opening their doors. What do you say to these people that today to say, you know what, I'm gonna, like Larry just said, I'm still gonna be charging all this, I'm still gonna be doing that, and the real estate industry is something that's just been hit hard everywhere. In the last, here in Canada, about 2 months, in the States, probably about a month, because somebody's sitting in Washington, here in Ottawa, and around the world, they're all going, oh no, inflation. So what do we tell these people? Will they listen?
Someone.
No. I got to answer this for Rusty. The smart ones will not only listen, that you won't have to tell them because they're already paying attention. And the dumb ones, you could hit them in the head with a hammer and they won't get it. You concur, my friend.
I'd say it a little bit more neutral given who my customer base is, but I think you're spot on, right? I think it's those three categories, right? And it's not whether the dealers want to do it or not, right? The dealers aren't going to have a choice as to how the whole thing unfolds because they don't have any control over it. The manufacturers are going to roll vehicles out when they can roll vehicles out, and there's zillions of vehicles sitting in storage that are waiting on ECUs. Manufacturers their decision is, do we just eat them or do we figure out how to deploy them as 2 model year old new vehicles? They still got to pay the unions to build vehicles, whether they're building vehicles or not. So the incremental cost to build the car isn't all that great. So they got to do it, right? So we're going to have this whole weird dynamic. It's difficult to predict when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, but for sure it's going to be very, very different, right? There's going to be normalization of inventory. There's going to be, consumers are going to drive things however they drive them. And the dealer is a retail outlet, and his future is going to be dictated by things that are not under his control. So it's their job to say, okay, this is what it looks like. How do we best serve the industry? How do we best serve our community? How do we best serve ourselves as our dealers? How do we meet the needs of our consumers to sell cars in a market that's different than it was a year ago, a month ago? One of the things that we're seeing, and it's really been enlightening for me. And again, I've been doing this over 3 decades, and for years and years and years, we could look back and see, okay, this is what happened in July. So we could pretty accurately predict what August is going to look like with a relatively high degree of certainty, right? Can't do that anymore, right? You've got giant companies, Urban Science, JD Power, Experience, got all this amazing technology and huge amounts of data on all the transactions that happen and how they transact and all that stuff. And trying to predict what's going to happen next month, the next 2 months, based on what happened a month or 2 ago, no longer works. And there's all kinds of studies on it, right? We work with a lot of manufacturers and lenders from an analytics side also. And when we're in a situation where some of the most well-funded, brightest minds in the world can't predict what's going to happen 30, 60, 90 days ago, we can't expect a car dealer or literally anybody else to do it, right? We just have to be agile. And I think digging our heels in and saying, this is fantastic, it's never going to end, hey, look at me, is a poor decision, right? It's the whole, we kind of can guess, right? If I was going to guess, and I may be way off, but I would guess that at some point in the not too distant future, 18, 19, 20 months from now, things are going to be they're going to be very, very different than they are now. There's going to be inventory. There's lots of pent up money, right? It's not quite as much as there was a year ago. A year ago, we were sitting on more pent up savings than we've ever been in U.S. history, right? Consumers couldn't go out of their house. The demand for the feel good, your house, you get married, you have kids, you buy a house, you buy a car. Those are the 4 big feel goods that adults get, right? And they couldn't do some of those things, right? I mean, there's a boom, lots of babies, right? But not as many car sales and stuff because people couldn't go out.
Hey, Rusty, your list of feel goods, you left out pizza and the Rolling Stones, just so I mentioned. I just want to be accurate.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Rusty, because previous job that I finished contract role, we were part of the Honda USA program, and also in initial conversations with Honda Canada with a similar program. And it was interesting to compare the wish list from the OEM on what dealers will be not have to do, but will be forced to do by the OEM, and sort of what they were looking for. And it's a long list, but the OEM is starting to say, listen, like, we need to fix this soon, and here are the things that you have to have on your list as Mr. Dealer. But I like to echo what Porsche Global started doing. They partnered with a company out of Spain, where they're just saying, hey, like the experience on the Porsche Pick Your Country site and the ABC Porsche site should be the same, because that's what customers want. So, I think it's only a question of when that dealership will have to adopt that echo of the OEM and say, hey man, like if I'm on honda.com and I'm building my car and I got a payment of X, if I go to ABC Honda, whether it be AutoNation or Sonic, or Lithia or Pickett, it should be a similar payment. It shouldn't be like one's at $450 a month lease and the other's at $7. I mean, that's crazy.
Ian, but that concept was already forwarded.
Yeah.
When they started to make every dealer make their buildings look exactly like every other building under that OEM. Now, here's what's so interesting about that. It's almost like a black comedy, but like crazy surreal. You have dealers that were forced to spend many more millions than they wanted.
Yeah.
And now you go buy their lots and it's 19 acres and there's 4 cars sitting on it. When you combine that with the fact you got Rusty West, you don't have a better expert on payments and calculations. Rusty, take into consideration what getting some of these people out of their cars are going to look like. And what about lease calculations based on a residual? And when you throw on top of that, the fact that the world's getting a little destabilized, it really is. We're seeing things 5 years ago, Henry Kissinger and Ben Franklin together couldn't figure out we'd see in terms of a world movement. Yeah. So I just think there's to not get up in the morning and say, man, things are changing all around me. I better have my eyes wide open. It's beyond dangerous.
Yeah. So there's a couple points, right? And I'll try and take them in order, right? So I agree with you 100% that if we're shopping online for a Porsche or a Honda or whatever, and we go and we say, okay, this is the car that I'm interested in, this is the car I want to build, right? What they should be able to do is they should be able to go to a website and build the car they want, and then find out who has it in inventory or what's the closest build to it, right? When you get with the domestics, there's a lot more. Porsche is probably more than any of them, but it's not as high a volume. But there's all kinds of options and stuff. So you may not get the exact car you want unless you build it, right? I'm a Porsche fanatic. I've always got one on order, right? And now we're a year behind waiting for my wife's car. But you can build exactly what you want, but you almost never find exactly what you want. You walk in the showroom, you fall in love with it, great, right? But I'd like to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm looking for. What's the closest one within a reasonable radius of my house that exists out there, and what are my payments? Where you run into challenges from the manufacturer level, and eventually we have to figure out how to solve this. But manufacturer level, they quote tier 1 pricing. Tier 1 pricing is at MSRP, it's at the special program, there's no rate markups, there's no whatever, right? So the payment that's quoted on the tier 1 level today does not remotely reflect what happens at the dealership. It's completely disconnected. Dealers are getting over window sticker, they're marking the rates way up. They've all got their own fees, their interpretations of tax laws, all those things have to be taken into consideration. And the manufacturers are in a position where they can't show different payments on the same car from one store to the next, because then it shows favoritism, which I don't, I'm not a franchise law expert or any of that kind of stuff, but to me, it's a free market environment. It's quote the dealer's payments their way. If they want to mark it up, they mark it up. If they're getting compared against the dealer who's not marking it up, right? The fact that it's happening at the tier 1 site as opposed to 3 seconds downstream, I don't think makes that much difference. I think a long time ago it did, but right now you can go and hit the 2 different dealerships' websites, and if they're accurately quoting the payments, you're going to be able to tell what the payments are. Right? So,
hey Rusty, excuse me, while you're on that point, but let's keep in mind that when a manufacturer, an OEM, sells a car to a dealer, it's an invoice, which is their equivalent of list price. We don't usually call the OEM and say, hey, can we we shopped it at 3 other manufacturers. Can we get it a little cheaper? So there's always going to be a little more gradation in what the retailers do, basically out of necessity, right?
So I disagree a little bit, right? So the cost is the cost, right? There are some tiered incentives with volume that have happened, but the cost of the vehicle is the cost of the vehicle, right? And if I'm buying a widget from you, doesn't matter whether it's a car or a piece of jewelry or a TV, if I'm in that business and I buy a widget from you, then I own that widget. I should be able to sell it for whatever I want to sell it for, right? Now, what's going to dictate what I can charge for that isn't me. It's the marketplace, right? The
But we're not disagreeing there. We're on the same page.
So, but if I tell you this TV, if I tell the consumer I'm ABC Tech TV, right? Vizio, right? And you go online Vizio and you're like, okay, this TV is $395, right? And you go into some specialty electronics shop and that TV is $695. You're like, why was it $695 instead of $395? And you go to Costco and the same TV is $275, right? It's a free market environment. These guys are going to charge whatever they want to charge, right? But if I'm looking to say, hey, who has this TV in stock, right? As opposed to it's a cool website, yay, I can't watch the Super Bowl on the ad. I need the TV, right? Who's got it in stock and how much am I going to write a check for in order to take delivery of this new TV or this new car, right? And going to the manufacturer's website and saying, hey, as a consumer, I want one of these, right? If I'm looking for a Honda, I should be able to go to one place and say, hey, where can I get this thing and what is it actually going to cost me, what my payment's going to be, as opposed to having to drill down and have that journey change. And I think that's going to, I don't know when we're going to get there. I think there's too many disconnects between the manufacturer and the retail outlet, the dealership, in order to get that right. And there's too many kind of laws, contracts, whatever that say, hey, I can't quote individual dealerships payments on tier 1. What we can quote is the national ad payments. And the national ad payments, nobody ever gets that payment, ever, right? There's stuff that goes behind that payment, right? It's a special rate, it's this rebate, it's this residual value if it's a lease, it's all this kind of stuff, right? But everybody's scenario is a little bit different, right? In order to get this, you got to have $4,995 down payment, plus taxes and registration fees and all this, that, and the other. And the customer says, okay, well, how much is that? They walk in and say, if I give you $3,000, what are my payments? Same program, payments are different because, a different amount of finance, that kind of stuff, right?
And supply and demand is always going to override everything in any program, in any situation, right?
Well, hands down. And when supply is super high, then you got to start putting, the captive lenders have to get more aggressive. The manufacturers get more aggressive, right? Right now, the manufacturers and the captive lenders aren't aggressive at all, right? Historically, captive lenders got the cheapest monthly payment on almost exactly 50% of the vehicles from Acura, right? And then the other 50%, it's somebody else. It's a major bank, it's a credit union, it's whatever. Right now, that number is less than 10%. Right? Captive lender programs, 90% of the time, there are non-captive programs, everything being equal, that generate a cheap monthly payment. They don't have to subsidize the programs in order to sell vehicles when there's a shortage of supply, right? Which is not a bad position to be in, right? I mean, that part for them is working pretty well. But when you run into this, I mean, this is a goofy dynamic, right? So long as we've ever been with a really short supply, we've got very high selling prices, very high rates, right? Super long terms, right? 96 months to finance a car, right? So I'm going to have this thing 3 times longer than the warranty, right? It's like, okay, how's this going to work, right? And then we're going to run into a situation where inventory hits. And when inventory hits, selling prices drop, monthly payments on new vehicles drop. And your value of a used car is almost exactly dictated by what it costs to acquire a new one, right? If I can get a new one for a payment that's $200 a month cheaper than I can buy a 2-year-old one, why do I want the 2-year-old one, right? So used car value is going to plummet, right? We're going to have a big mess because everybody's going to be upside down in their car. You're going to have lending institutions that are going to be out of trust with the federal government because the value of their portfolio now is 20% less than it was a year ago. And then they're going to be scrambling. What are they going to do about that, right?
And how about lazy used car managers who get used to these giant profits and aren't paying attention and wake up one day and they've got 100 cars in the lot that are way, way over what the real value is.
Yeah, the whole lot's underwater, right?
Tip O'Neill, an American politician, said a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose a job. It's the same people that used to come in with Consumer Reports and say, well, they say you own the car for 19,000, I'll give you 17, are now the same ones freaking out. I happen to be a musician, so I try to see everything through the prism of music and cars. And I'm laughing my butt off because they're screaming that Bruce Springsteen tickets are $5,000 and he's supposed to be the man of the people. I mean, you're either a capitalist or you're not.
A billionaire man of the people.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna be in an era here in the not too distant future where leasing may be the savior of the auto, right? You've got historically when everybody was upside down, which was 8-10 years ago, there was huge negative equity. It's just how it worked, right? Yeah. You can get a consumer out of his lease or get out of his trade and get him in something new, and maybe keep his payments close to the same, going from a finance to a lease, but put him in a 3-year deal, and then he's out from under this mess in 2 or 3 years, right? You're going to have a bunch of vehicles that are coming back to the lending institutions down the road that are way upside down, right? And right now, lease lenders are happy as they can be because for the first time in history, cars are coming in off lease, and they're worth a whole lot more than what they have them on the books for, right? But that's not going to last forever, and a lot of them aren't even letting you buy it, right? My wife's lease was up a year ago, and I tried to get her a different car. She was in love with the one she had. It's a 3-year lease, and I bought it. It was an Audi RS7, so it's a rocket ship sedan. And I played hell buying that car. Right? I mean, literally, they made me jump through hoops to write a check for a car. And I'm sitting there looking. The 4 corners of the contract spell out, you can buy it for this much with a $595 disposition fee or whatever. And I'm like, okay, so what do I do? I'm gonna send you a check, send me a title. No, well, you can't buy it. I'm like, what do you mean I can't buy it? Right? I'm just on
look at your contract.
Yeah.
So what did they say to that?
So they, after a couple of phone calls, I've got a super long fuse, right? So I'm always polite, nice. But when the fuse is gone, I'm not quite as nice. About the 4th phone call, they got a wire, and about 10 days later, I got a title. So,
well, yeah, they wanted to make their fortune on that car.
I had 30 grand equity in the car, right? I mean, why in the world would, and that's odd because, the AMG products, the RS products, all those things that as soon as they're out of warranty cost more than the car payment to keep them running cars. Typically, when they're out of warranty, their values plummet. And this thing was, gold. We looked at a bunch of different new ones, right? She's just in love with this car. And every dealer is like, you got tons of equity in this thing. And I'm like, okay, that's good to know. And
we don't have a car to give you in return.
Well, yeah. She looked at, it was an RS6 Avant, which is kind of a cool car.
Oh, yeah.
But she, I said, what do you want? I'll get her anything she wants. She's a car nut. And
Did you pay cash for it?
I leased it originally, and then I just paid it off.
I was going to say, because I know this guy named West who could get you a hell of a deal in payments. He's pretty sure.
Yeah. That's I do pretty well when I go to lease a car. I do okay.
Did they offer to cut you the 30 grand equity back?
Huh?
Did they offer to cut you the 30 grand in equity back to keep the car?
Did Audi?
Yeah. The deal.
No, Audi said no. They wanted me to turn the car in. No.
They were smart enough to understand the value, but not smart enough to negotiate. And as everybody on this program knows, if you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Well, it was they weren't. I think as an organization they do a great job, right? I mean, we're huge Audi fans. We've got a bunch of different ones. We've got a bunch of them now. It's a great product, and they lease really well, or they did when we got those, right? But it's it's every lender right now. They all want the cars back, and I don't blame them to a certain extent because I mean, if you look at the history of leasing, and I've been a part of leasing literally since day one. I mean, we kind of wrote the book on leasing way back in the day, and my dad put Ford in the leasing business in the late 50s with what's now their red carpet lease, right? Late 50s, early 60s. So big believer in leasing. But if you look at just the last 30 years, lending institutions have gotten beat to death with residual value losses, right? And now for the first time really in history, they're not even, they're killing it when they come back in, right? So
Well, the interesting thing, Rusty, the interesting thing I'm seeing here with this comment is what they're doing is they're telling everybody you can't buy your car. And there's going to be a certain number of people they'll say, okay, you'll take my car back. And then there's going to be a certain number of people in the middle that are going to go, well, no, I don't want to. They negotiate. And people like you that say no. And they're trying to make up for that now. And I'd be very interested, and I don't know if in your case, if it was Audi US or the dealer or whatever, but I'd be very interesting to see what happens in a year and a half to that dealer, if it is the dealer, when the whole market changes. And then all of a sudden they have to pivot and they're still on that, we will do it this way because that's how you do it.
But how do you get around
it
that
wasn't the
contract?
dealer, it was a captive lender.
Oh, okay.
Wow. Because here they just defer it to the dealer.
Yeah, well, they have, so, and all the lenders are doing this now. There's a different payoff if it's me versus if it is someone other than me, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, if I went to trade that in on a Mercedes, then it's fair market value is what it costs them to buy it as opposed to, right? And I've got a wholesale license, right? So I'm like, well, I buy it on my wholesale license. I don't have to pay additional sales tax and all that stuff. I got a dealer plate and all that, right? And I couldn't, right? I mean, I had to buy it myself, even though I'm the exact same entity, right? And it was even registered to both, right? I mean, it was goofy, right? In my situation, I'm sure is very unique compared to the normal consumer, but still, if my contract says I can buy the car for this much, right? Then I should be able to buy the car for this much, and it shouldn't matter whether I'm buying it or whether I'm trading it in. If I have that equity, I should be able to use that equity, right? When a consumer is pitched on a lease, and if you guys remember half a car, which we talked about a few minutes ago, right? You're going to pay for the part of the car that you use, right? And let's just say it's half. Things got a 50% residual value. You're going to pay for 50% of it, right? And then in 3-4 years, whatever it is, you bought a $35,000 or $40,000 car. Residual value is $20,000. If the car's worth more than $20,000, you've got equity. If it's worth less than $20,000, you do not have an exposure on a closed-end lease. That is the beauty of a lease, and that's what the manufacturers and the lending institutions have been trying to teach the general population for years and years and years. You get equity or you have no exposure, right? And we don't know. When we make a pretty good guess as a lender that we think the car is going to be worth this much, we hope we're spot on. That way we don't have a loss or anything. But if you find yourself in a unique position where that thing's worth more than the residual value at the end, then you're in good shape. Trade it in, get a new car, you got some money down, right? And that dynamic is evaporating unless the consumer is the person who's buying it, right? And that's a little weird.
Hey, Rusty, I was talking about it, I think you agree with me that how cyclical it all is. That's not unprecedented, because I can remember I was a Cadillac dealer years ago. We could reach out to before it was Ally, it was GMAC, and actually buy the car for less than what the stated residual was, and either sell it to someone else or even sell it to the customer. So that's not unprecedented.
You could buy it for less. I agree.
Right.
Right. And that's okay. Right. But what the difference is that that's fair market value. You were buying it for fair market value. Right. Fair market value on these cars now is much higher than residual value. Right. So, in her car, fair market value was $30,000 more. From a wholesale perspective, probably 22 grand more than the residual value. Right. And, But
do you remember salesmen, even though you weren't on maybe the retail end, you were handling, your end of it. I remember salesmen, they quit because they didn't want to start dealing with leases. They didn't like the concept. Or guys, they quit because, I don't want to deal with computers. It's all back to the same thing. You've got to keep moving forward, or as we said earlier, or you go backward. Doesn't matter whether you're a salesperson or a dealer. It's just a lot more dangerous if you're a dealer because it's your investment, it's your business. Salesman doesn't work out, goes down the road.
But how do they get around the clause in the lease saying you can buy it for X? Like, how do you get around that clause? I don't understand how that's possible.
Because when you throw capitalism into the same arena of maybe being a little bit dishonest, you asked the question, I'm giving you the answer. H.L. Mencken, a famous journalist, once said that nobody ever went broke underestimating the taste or the intelligence of the American public. People do a lot of insane things. And like everything else, if you're not paying attention with your health, who you vote for, how you spend time with your family, bad things happen. I mean, this is just an isolated incident, but listen, I talk about when I trained, Rusty, about Honus Wagner and how people put a value on that card. And now they got the Mickey Mantle card. We might be talking $8, $10, $12 million, which to me is nuts, but they probably thought they hit the lottery. He didn't want to be on a baseball card that was sponsored by tobacco, because back then the preeminent sports in the United States were boxing and baseball. Everybody knew who these guys were. There was no NFL or NBA. Hockey hadn't infiltrated our country yet. So you can understand people smoking. Handsome athletes smoke, beautiful women smoke. But today, if you see a package of cigarettes, it says, if you smoke this, you will die. Oh, great, let me get 2 packs. So last quote, Einstein, they asked him, what's the difference between genius and stupidity? And he says, genius has its limits. So when people don't pay attention, when they don't look at what they're signing, when they don't consult people, they're done. Rusty, am I correct?
You know what? I'm gonna disagree.
Well, you're going to disagree with me or Einstein because we often don't get lumped together.
I actually have a signed Albert Einstein book framed on my wall, right?
Okay.
My wife gave me, right? So
you're picking on me now.
But I'm about to.
Bring it on, baby.
So no, listen, all kidding aside, right? The agreement, the way the agreement's written is that the person who signed the lease can buy that vehicle for the residual value plus the disposition, right? Someone else goes to buy the vehicle, they have to pay fair market value for it, right? Now, fair market value is never below the residual value, but it might be above the residual value, right? So it's, they have some very, very bright suits draft these lease agreements, right? And the thing that's tough is that at the end of the day, if I have equity in the vehicle, I'm a consumer and I'm gonna pick a state like California because we're lucky enough to be taxed on absolutely everything here, right? That when I go to trade this vehicle in, if I've got a whole bunch of equity in it, but I'm the only one who can realize the equity as a consumer, I have to buy it first. And I can pay sales tax on the purchase price before I trade it into a deal, right? Now, the dealer, as soon as he sells it, he's gonna sell it to a consumer and then it's gonna get taxed again. So it's just, from a mathematics standpoint, it's an inefficient process as opposed to saying, hey, look, I got a 30 grand equity, right? This dealer's paying it off for me. Now the money has to come out of my account. It can't come out of a dealer's account, right? Is a little bit weird. And then obviously dealers aren't in a position when they say, okay, we're going to put the money in your account and then you go pay it. Because then you're the one who paid it off, then you get the tax stuff. And it's just, it's cumbersome. I don't think anyone ever expected it to be an issue because no one predicted that vehicles were going to be worth much more than the residual value at the end of their lease, right? And there's a couple, right? Some of the Porsches are worth, way over window sticker 3 years from now, right? But the average car typically, it's got its curve, right? Off the showroom for this and then kind of this linear drop, and they've been doing that forever and ever and ever, right? But nobody knew that, okay, well, we're going to have, all these natural disasters, all this stuff, all these chip companies, having issues. And then we're going to have a war in Ukraine. And now we got chip companies that can spool up, but they can't get the stuff that they need to make the chips because they're coming from a country that has an issue, I guess. I'm trying to politically how to say that.
Raining bombs on it. Yeah.
Stupid stuff, right? But it's comedy of errors, right? One after the other, and created an environment where cars are worth way more than historically they ever would have been, and supply and demand, right? It is what it is. We have to look at it, as technologists. We look at it from the outside world, right? What's the very biggest problem that we can solve, right? Because I'm a firm believer in your compensation is directly proportionate to the level of difficulty of the problem you're capable of solving. The guy or gal who solves the problem of getting the Happy Meal through the drive-through into the minivan for the hungry kid, it's not going to get paid the same as the guy or gal who cures cancer, right? And everything in between. So when we look at what's going on in the industry and how screwed up is it, what's the most screwed up piece there is, and then how can we address that? If we can solve that problem properly, then we're doing good. And then, and the result down the road is that you monetize it, and you get all the rest of the stuff, right? The monetization can't be the goal. That's got to be a byproduct. You got to solve the big problem. The biggest problem that we've seen in the last few years is that the industry is a huge mess, and consumers' expectations are just terribly mismanaged. From every layer of the sales funnel, they get a different message. They get a different pricing message, a different payment message. It's this, it's that, it's whatever. And they're like, okay, well, this doesn't happen on Amazon. This doesn't happen on, maybe wish.com. If you ever tried to buy something from them, 12 months later, you get something from China that doesn't work, right? But all the rest of the stuff, right? It's our lives are online. We know how to order food online. The only thing we can't do is fill our cars up online, right? And EVs, you'll be able to plug them into your house if they ever get the grid figured out. That's a whole nother debacle, right? If we could solve that problem, we'd get out of the software business. But the biggest problem that we've seen is this huge disconnect between what's real and what's being presented to the consumer. And what's real is dictated by the person who's selling the product, right? All the other elements for any given point in time are completely static, right? Now, they change every single day. We track billions of pieces of information. But today, the programs that are available for this particular car, these rebates, these incentives, this tax, this registration fee calcs, this rate, residual value, all that stuff, that's static. What's the biggest variable is you've got a whole bunch of different dealerships who are all competing to find that balance between profitability and selling their products, right? And it's an easy balance to find right now because they don't have that many products, so they can charge a premium for it. But then, they still got to watch, rent, repeat, right? So if we're not accurately representing the dealer's payments their way, then we're mismanaging the consumer's expectations. And when we do that, we have a loss of trust, and we have poor CSI and all the rest of the stuff. I don't know how many zillions of studies there have been where consumers who pay a premium price for a premium experience are happier than people who pay a lower price and get a crappy experience, right? So we know consumers are glad to pay, right? And you get there's arguments. Okay, there's $100,000 markup on an $80,000 Ford Lightning fair, right? Only if you really want it that bad. I wouldn't sell it that way, but I'm not a car dealer, right? But the consumer who's going in and having a fantastic experience, even if they're paying an awful lot for the car, they're not going to be anywhere near as upset as the guy who thinks it's going to be this, and then he goes in and gets hit with a ball peen hammer. Boom! No, that's not really what it is. It's this, but I really, really want it, and then it's a battle, right? And you're back to that. Go back 35 years, right? Your image of a used car salesman is what? Big teeth, slick back hair, plaid polyester sport coat. Come on in, we're going to make you a great deal, right? And that was earned, right? Because there were some guys out there who were super shady. I think as an industry, we spent decades rehabilitating that. And pre-COVID and pre-kind of digital retailing effort, I think dealers, and there's always bad apples and there's always stellar companies, but for the most part, did a very good job and put a diligent effort in getting away from that stigma, being an honorable place to go do business, being a cool facility, coming in and, having them smile and take care of your car and the service and all the rest of that stuff, right? And that was important. They had to learn, right? And they did a great job. And then digital retailing comes out of the woodwork. You got all these technology companies that are out there that are doing it wrong. And we're right back exactly where we were. You told me it was this, and bait and switch means this. And they're not bait and switching them. It's not the dealer's fault. They're just not accurately being represented. And that disconnect is killing the reputation of a lot of dealers, and unrightfully so, right? I mean, if you go out and you do the whole 80s, crap, right? You deserve to get clobbered, right? But if you're doing business, even if you're charging crazy markups, but you're not afraid to tell the customers about it, right? You're doing business in an honorable fashion, but you're not being accurately represented, then they're looking at you like you're the guy with the big hair and the big teeth, even though you're not. And that's the biggest challenge that needs to be solved. And that's why we're working so hard to try and solve it.
Well, I have to say this, I don't really worry about the person spending $180,000 on a light. I really don't. I worry about the person who's hooked into payments on a Hyundai Sonata or a Ford Focus. Well, they don't make Focus anymore, but a Jeep Renegade or something where they paid a $6,000 premium just to get one because they really got to have a car, and they're buried into this thing for 7-8 years. That's my concern. Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. We actually ran out of time, but this was so much fun that we kept it going. Rusty, we appreciate you being here. Do you have any parting thoughts?
This is going to sound really hokey. I get every once in a while I get a really good fortune cookie, right? And it's not like I eat a ton of Chinese food, but I'm almost 60 years old, so I've had my fair share of fortune cookies. And when I get the really good ones, I stick them to my monitor, right? And I got one that says, prepare today for the demands of tomorrow, plan your mood, right? And I thought, God, that's right up our alley. That's what we've been preaching to everybody in the ecosystem, which is try to figure out what you think the consumer is going to look like 18 months from now. What's the marketplace going to look like 18 months from now? What's the landscape going to be 18 months from now? And take this war chest of money that we have and this kind of calm before the storm and invest it in your future. Figure out how you want to meet the needs of the future consumer and how you want to better your future competitor, right? And I think the dealers who really take that seriously are going to be in a wonderful position. And I think the ones who don't are going to be scratching their head thinking, God, I kind of screwed this one up. So.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you taking your time. Larry, as always, thank you. And Ian, I'll leave it to you to close.
Thanks very much. Great show. Have a great week. And for everyone in the Canadian market, have a great long weekend day off. Ciao.